Good morning. Welcome back. Good to have you on the program and good to have you viewing on MCTV, Multicultural TV, in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region. I am Bo Tiwari and this is Brighter Morning with Bo. We have our colleague and friend, Professor Hamid Ghany, who has just retired as professor and head of Silicis in St. Augustine University of the West Indies, but who is a formidable commentator on national and regional issues, and especially constitutional, political, and what can I say, structural matters in the constitutional order and system. So let's have a discussion with him now. Morning, Professor Ghany. How are you?
Well, very well, thanks. Good morning to you and your viewers as well.
Okay, I hope now that you don't have the day-to-day tasks of going to work, you have a lot of reflective time, and I hope you're thinking about what work you're going to do next. By work, I don't mean a job, I mean the kind of work that you're going to do, because I know you're very steeped in intellectual work.
Yeah, well, some people say retirement is just a word. Yeah. I think that's what it's going to be.
I mean, I think people like us never really stop working.
No.
I mean, you shift from one place to another, but you keep working because your mind can't stay quiet. And once your mind is alert and at work, you have to find things to do that make life fulfilling. And that's the whole purpose. Why do you live? You live in order to make life meaningful and fulfilling, both for you and for others around you. But tell me something. We had this major shift in Tobago politics. You have a complete takeover of the House of Assembly by the PDP, which is a relatively new party. And you have the emergence of what you might call new leaders, new governors in Tobago. What do you make of this? I give you the initial take and then we'll carry on from there.
Yes, well, I think the one thing that we need to appreciate, of course, is that the PDP is a fully homegrown Tobago party. It has no links to, it doesn't have a Trinidad arm in terms of the PDP. It's a purely homegrown Tobago party. And as a consequence of that, it has resonated with people over time. I mean, it really emerged out of Watson Duke contesting as an independent candidate in Tobago East in the 2015 general election and saving his deposit. He got about 1,500 votes as an independent candidate, saved his deposit, and then got into forming the PDP. And they contested the 2017 THA election, but it was a three-way fight with the PNM and the Tobago Forwards. And there was a lot of vote splitting that went on between themselves and the Tobago Forwards. They won 2 seats, and then there was a third seat that lost by 5 votes because of a significant split with the Tobago Forwards in one of the seats in the eastern part of Tobago. So that I think that you can see that they've come from the ground up, and they are part of the whole Tobago landscape over the last few years. The PNM, recognizing this, obviously attempted to link the PDP to the UNC in Trinidad in order to, in a sense, replicate the campaign of 2013 when the UNC was in power in Trinidad and the People's Partnership was there with the TOP in Tobago, which was quite successful, 12-0 for the PNM. But it didn't work in January and it didn't work in December of this year because primarily, to my mind, because the UNC is not in power in Port of Spain. And therefore, the bite in that argument wasn't as good. So that I don't know what else they were searching for with creating the link to a party in Trinidad. But it didn't work. The people of Tobago were not convinced In addition to which, I thought that some of the PNM advertising was very negative. They had some positives, where they were highlighting things that they had done and accomplished with Tobago. But there was a lot of negative campaigning, getting into personalities, and even using the images of practicing journalists as a means of legitimizing the stories that they were airing. None of that worked, and I didn't think the campaign was a very, very good campaign. It was far too negative, and would have turned a lot of people off.
Yeah, let's talk, since you raised that issue, let's talk about this issue of money in politics. I mean, it is clear that the PNM spent a lot of money on this campaign. They spent it as a political party, and they used the resources of the state as well, which would be a reflection of taxpayers' money, in order to mount a heavy media campaign. And they also had a lot of gifts of all kinds using the state coffers, which was described as bribery by the PDP, and which was commented upon by independent observers in Tobago, saying that it looks like bribery. The PDP did not have a lot of money, that is clear, but they ran a ground campaign. I'm sure the PNM had a ground campaign too, because they always do. But the money did not work. The gifts did not work. The bribes, so to speak, did not work. How do you explain that? And what is the role of money in politics? We see it in the United States, where it makes a big difference. The amount of money you have is related to the amount of influence that you can wield. How does it work in Trinidad and Tobago? And here we have the particular case of Tobago.
Well, I think in many respects we see that the private sector money from the financiers is what will fuel a lot of this advertising that goes on, and that's the air game. The ground game is a different force, where you have a combination of volunteers and paid supporters and a variety of people who, just by the pure enthusiasm for the message and the campaign, go out there. Of course, many of them will be looking for their own return when, if you get into power, they're looking for their little piece of the pie, which is, the standard operating procedure. Where I think, having all the money, there's a limit to it, because you then have to conceptualize a campaign. And it was clear to me that those who organized and strategized around the PNM campaign missed the mark completely, because the campaign offended a lot of people in Tobago. I've heard a lot of discussion pieces, even from the election night starting on, with discussion on it. People were offended by some of the ads that said that Tobago only earned about 200 million a year in its own revenue, and then got all these other handouts from the central government and so on, which really portrayed the island not in a very good light. And I think that some of that started to turn against them. But then I think there's also the issue of the disconnect between what is happening in Tobago and how Trinidad media understands it. And the lens through which Trinidad media attempts to interpret Tobago politics has for years been one where they have completely misinterpreted what is going on the ground in Tobago. And that comes from a place of being ignorant about the challenges of daily life in Tobago, and what it means to live in Tobago and have a heavy dependence on Port of Spain for a lot of goods and services and decisions and so on. And that is where I think the government, in taking the political risk to table an autonomy bill back in 2018, and then they made certain changes until they got to the point where the final offer was not rising to the standard of what was being demanded. And you had not only political voices in Tobago not accepting the version of the autonomy bill that was being put forward from the Joint Select Committee, but also independent voices in Tobago simply saying that, we are not accepting this as an autonomy bill. And I think that is where the Tobago nationalism rose considerably in the last two elections. And the Tobago nationalism has been quite strong, because once you open the door on the autonomy discussion, you've let the genie out of the bottle, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And therefore it became a question of the government having to defend what appeared to be something short of what a lot of people in Tobago wanted. And that put them in a very difficult place to be able to run a campaign, two campaigns. So you saw what went on. They went from 12-0 in 2013 to 10-2 in 2017 to 6-6 in 2021, and then now 14-1. So the pendulum was swinging all the while. But the acceleration in the last year or so, to my mind, came from the Tobago Autonomy Bill and the fact that it came up short in relation to expectations and demands in Tobago.
Well, I want to raise two issues on that bill. Do you agree with me that that bill is now dead in the water and they might as well throw it out of the window?
Well, the bill would be dead in the water if the government has no intention of making any changes to what they have. The bill can be resuscitated if some of the demands that were being made are then accommodated and they attempt to do it. But it's not what the government wants, because the government is in a position where there are powerful interests in Trinidad that do not want that bill to be given more in terms of what Tobago would want. And therefore, that the mask has been ripped off from that, so that I don't see that the bill is going to go anywhere unless significant concessions are made in terms of what is being demanded from the Tobago side of this equation.
Well, you see, the PNM in Tobago, Tracy Davidson Celestine, articulating the view from the Tobago PNM, supported this bill and touted this bill as something that Tobago needed and was valuable to Tobago. And of course, the PDP was always hostile to it, and there are a number of independent commentators who basically, as you yourself have pointed out, saw the bill as terribly deficient. As you say, there is a rise of Tobago nationalism, and with that, a reconceptualizing of what autonomy is. So the first problem with this bill is that it's not going to get any traction at all with the PDP, not from Farley Davidson, not from Duke, not from the party that is now in power in the House of Assembly and leads the people of Tobago from the House of Assembly. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's not going to get any support from the independent thinkers in Tobago who have been hostile to this bill from the beginning because of the extent to which the executive in Tobago dominates everything under this particular bill. What do you think is the state of the discussion and the evolution of that discussion now in terms of autonomy for Tobago? Do you think that it is likely to subside? That is to say, the issue is not going to come up. The PDP will simply govern, do its business, etc., engage the government here, have whatever conflicts it needs to have, and proceed? Or do you think that the issue will come up as an issue again and persist over the next 4 years?
Oh, I think the issue is going to come up again. I mean, the issue, as I see it from the PDP standpoint, is that they want final decision making in Scarborough. They don't want final decision making in Port of Spain, then transmitted to Scarborough, and then you become an agent of the central government. That is how this is being portrayed, and this is where the Tobago nationalism has risen because of that perception and reality. So that the rubber is going to hit the road after today on the issue of the opening of beaches in Tobago. Who has the final decision making? Now, the Minister of Health is on record, Mr. Dial Singh, as saying that the final decision on issue of beaches lies with the Prime Minister. I have seen that Watson Duke says he's going to table for discussion in the executive this question to take a position, for the administration to take a position. And I'm seeing already that Fali Augustine is telegraphing that he's seeking legal advice on the powers of the THA. But this is where the rubber hits the road. And it's going to start with beaches, which is very central to the whole Tobago economy and tourism. So that, to my mind, this starts today. And that is where there will be a number of showdowns with the central government over the issue of who has jurisdiction, final jurisdiction, in respect of matters in Tobago. And I think that, as the Calypsonian says, the journey now starts.
Yeah, so the issue of the discussion on autonomy is unlikely to be a continuing discussion and engagement in the traditional sense of talk, and is much likely to be a series of tests of what autonomy actually means for the House of Assembly of Tobago in relation to the central government of Trinidad. And as you are mentioning now, this issue of the beaches has become the first test on the day that Fali Augustine is being sworn in as Chief Secretary. So this is the pattern you think is going to emerge now?
Yeah, and I think that the issue of beaches is the first one. During the campaign, Mr. Duke had mentioned the issue of allowing students to go to school whether they were vaccinated or unvaccinated. And quite interestingly, shortly after he said that, I saw that the government took a policy position that said that they would allow students vaccinated and unvaccinated to start going to school. So that took the teeth out of that particular one. The beaches, I think, is going to resonate more in Tobago. Now, the Prime Minister is on record as saying that he has been wrestling with this in his mind and was thinking of the issue of opening beaches for part of the day, in the early part of the day, and didn't want it in the later part of the day because he's afraid of congregation and partying and so on. But I think what is happening here, this is an issue where once it is pursued, if beaches stay closed in Trinidad and the issue is opening beaches in Tobago, that is the issue where you're talking about a policy differentiation that encapsulates the whole self-government argument for Tobago. That Tobago doesn't necessarily have to fall in line with what Trinidad wants. Now, this is going to be portrayed in that particular light. It is going to be portrayed in that light to make the point that Tobago wants autonomy to make final decisions in Scarborough about Tobago, as opposed to final decisions about Tobago being made in Port of Spain. That has been the sticking point and burning point over the years on this whole question of Tobago autonomy. And now I think we have arrived at that place where after Mr. Robinson started in 1977 with his motion on internal self-government, we have traveled this path and arrived at this place today, where after Fali Augustine is sworn in as Chief Secretary and all of the other formalities are concluded, we're going to see that they're going to start with the issue of final decision-making in Tobago, Tobago autonomy, and the beaches then become the issue on which this matter is going to start to be fought between Scarborough and Port of Spain.
All right. Now, I mean, political choices are very important. I mean, the Prime Minister can read the writing on the wall and open all beaches in Trinidad and Tobago, or say that he's starting with beaches in Tobago first, and then some kind of gradual opening up in Trinidad, and kind of diffuse the issue, or he can maintain his position, and then the House of Assembly declares all beaches open, and then we have a kind of confrontational situation between central government and the House of Assembly in Tobago. How do you see the problem of that decision making and the consequences, and how do you see this scenario playing out?
Well, I think this is tailor-made for the autonomy issue, because the way that the PDP will argue is that this is the example of what they've been talking about all along. Port of Spain wants to tell us how we must live in Tobago. That is exactly how this is going to be framed. And if it is that you get police being sent in to chase people off of beaches and so on, that is exactly what the PDP would want. Because politically, the imagery of that is that the police are being sent by the forces in Port of Spain who don't want you to go to the beach. And I think it is something that the government, I would imagine the government has already taken this into consideration as to what the options are. Minister Feld has already drawn the line in the sand with regard to his comments yesterday. And therefore, the issue of the opening of beaches, if you open beaches in Tobago and they don't open in Trinidad, there'll be a political backlash in Trinidad. So, one has to also be very careful. So the political waters on this are very waters that have to be sailed through very, very carefully, because the issue of beaches is, in fact, the beachhead on which this matter of autonomy is going to get kickstarted.
So you think a line has been drawn in the sand, so to speak, and we are headed for a confrontation, or do you think a retreat is possible? Do you think that the PNM would be so unwise as a government as to go for an immediate confrontation one day after the Chief Secretary is sworn in Tobago?
No, I don't think that the PNM is looking for confrontation. I think that there's a lot going to be going on inside of the PNM right now. But this is a public policy matter, and the Prime Minister has already hedged his bets. So it's not to say that he's going to be making a concession. He has been saying for weeks now that he has been wrestling with this in his mind. Yeah, he's been saying for weeks now he's been wrestling with this in his mind. And he may very well try to turn this around, have a meeting with Fali, and they have a nice conversation, come to a consensus, and all sides agree, and some kind of policy decision is made on beaches. Because he has already carved out his beachhead on this matter, which is he's been thinking about it on the spiritual side of bathing early in the morning and closing it down, not wanting the partying in the afternoon. So he has already staked his ground on this and has given himself some wiggle room. So it's not necessarily something where he has taken a position, he has closed out the matter. He has not. But I think he would have been politically aware enough to know that the issue of beaches could become a major issue depending on the outcome of the THA election, because the PDP was very clear in its position. So I don't think they would want a situation to arise whereby it emerges that the perception is created that Port of Spain is once again dominating Scarborough and telling Tobagonians how to live their lives. And that is what they've been saying all along. They want final decision-making in Scarborough, not final decision-making in Port of Spain. And a lot of people in Trinidad do not quite understand the dynamic involved with that issue. Yes. That the whole, you played some clips earlier about with what's new. And one of the things he was talking about was self-determination for Tobago. Yes. And I think that, all of this is going to be fueled into that. And they're going to be making some demands.
Yeah, okay. I mean, the last thing I would think that the Prime Minister and the government would want is police chasing people off the beaches in Tobago. I think that would be so ugly and so bad, not just for the government, but for Trinidad and Tobago and for everybody, that they better do some rethinking here. I'm going to ask you one hard question, but I want you to give me a short answer because we have to go. Do you think that Watson Duke, given the position that he has now taken on the PSA, and given that he intends to operate as a force, as a power in Tobago, and as a player in Trinidad and Tobago, do you think that he's going to take steps to expand the influence of the PDP in Trinidad?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, I think if the PDP did that, that would be their demise. Because the business of crossing the water and attempting to come into the politics of Trinidad is not going to work for them. They are a homegrown Tobago party. They're seeking Tobago interests. They've staked out their position. It is very clear, where they are. And I don't think that they're going to try to come into Trinidad politics. They are a homegrown Tobago party with Tobago interests at heart. And their power comes from being able to control the position in Tobago, having regard to the fact that they can ultimately control Tobago politics, which will have an impact in Trinidad in terms of the politics in Trinidad. But I don't see the PDP spreading its wings to come across the water to try to get into Trinidad politics.
In other words, to do that, he needs permission from the people of Tobago.
I don't even think he will try to seek permission from the people of Tobago. He formed that party to advocate for Tobago interests, and they've arrived at the point 5 years later where they have accomplished their mission. They've gotten to where they want. Now the next step is to try to get greater autonomy for Tobago so that they can govern the affairs of Tobago, because that is the argument that they've made all along. And I don't see them making a Trinidad argument at all.
I think I might have a slightly different view on that, but we'll see how it plays out because it's a complex situation here. It's a complex situation here because Duke has been on this program in which he's made it clear that the PDP is a national party. It is not a Tobago party only. And I take your argument of being a homegrown, nationalistic Tobago movement for autonomy and self-determination. But I think that there might well be a difference of opinion and perception about the role of the PDP by the people of Tobago and even some of the major players in Tobago and Mr. Watson Duke himself. Anyway, we'll continue this discussion another time. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and we move on now to Andrew Chan and the news.